Hey guys, this is John, and I'm playing Snapper in the 15-minute pool on ICC. Snapper is 2097, decent rating in this pool, and opens with D4. Just checking out their stats real quick before I reply. Peak rating of 2228 in the pool, not bad at all. Okay, let's play D5. I might try to play a classical Slav instead of a semi-Slav. I had a request for that opening, and I've actually been studying it a bit recently, so if we get that chance, I will take it. So knight f6. E3 could be played, which keeps us out of Slav territory, although there is some way I can try to guide the game into a Slav position. Yeah, because E3 is often played by players who don't want to face the Slav. If bishop f5, traditionally this move has been kind of frowned on because of c takes d5, c takes d5, queen b3. But there's a gambit line that goes knight c6, queen takes b7, bishop d7 that I've read about recently, but I don't know that I feel confident playing it. So I would like to play bishop f5, but not sure it's justified. I think e6 and keeping it in semi-Slav territory is the better thing to do, so I'll just play that. Yeah, and now we have mainline semi-Slav. We'll just play knight bd7. At least with this move order, black has ruled out lines with bishop g5, which are some of the most dangerous in the whole semi-Slav complex. Okay, so let's take it. We'll play b5 after white takes back. And after bishop d3, I usually play bishop b7. So let's do that. So black's plan here is a6 followed by c5. And if white doesn't do anything about that, black will, at the very least, equalize effortlessly and often ends up with an advantage. So the move white has to play here if they want anything is e4. They have to advance in the center. Rook e1 is too slow. I'm going to get c5 in, and this is a very useful pawn advance to achieve because I open my light square bishop, and I am going to take the pawn on d4, or white will take on c5 and liquidate, and then white doesn't have a central advantage, as they may be accustomed to in this line. 2 pawns versus 1. Okay, a4, so white is taking a measure to undermine my queen side. b4 would be the standard reaction. Just debating whether I should play or even think about c4, c4 followed by b4, but that seems like an overreaction. Yeah, let's just play b4. It's nice that white's knight can't go to e4. I have that square covered twice. I think in a lot of cases, rook e1 is just going to turn out to be a useless move for white. Mostly that move would make sense in the context of pushing e4, but with d4 being so unstable, I don't think white can look forward to doing that. So the knight looks awkward on a2, but white will often reroute it into the game by playing bishop d2 and knight c1 to b3. I think I should play a5 just to stabilize b4 a bit more. I don't have to play it right away, though. I mean, I could play just bishop e7. That might be the most flexible thing to do. Bishop e7, and if white takes on c5, I can take with the knight. And then if knight takes b4, I even... Ooh, I thought I had a5 for a second, but I guess not. Let's just play this move. I could sit there and think whether I can delay that move, but it's probably just best to play it and get it over with. So white's going to fianchetto this bishop, but that leaves this knight out in the cold because they're taking away that b3 square from that piece. I understand the desire to put the bishop on this long diagonal, that dark square bishop, but what are you going to do with this knight? That would be my question. So bishop e7 comes to mind. Bishop e7, bishop b2, just castle, probably rook c1 then. Black has no complaints. Sometimes I might consider bishop takes f3, followed by taking on d4, but giving up that light square bishop is a pretty serious decision. It's a great piece on its diagonal, and I have to be a bit better developed to consider something like that. So let's just do this. White could take on c5, but I could just castle then. I don't even have to take it back immediately. So let's just keep this nice and simple. Castle. I was anticipating rook c1. I think there's a chance they may play knight c1. Just going off the minor pieces, I like my prospects slightly more than white because this knight is misplaced. Whereas I have a standard array of minor pieces. Yeah, rook c1, okay. Rook c8 could be played. I could take on d4. Queen b6 maybe. So if I take d4 and then knight takes, knight c5, attacking the bishop. I don't want to needlessly give white's knight a good square on d4, so I don't think I'll play that. I think I'll just play rook c8. Occupy a file that's very likely to be opened in the future, because this pawn tension is not going to last forever. Yeah, I think this move is a little weakening. I really do. Because they're trying to advance e5, but in the process, they weaken d4. So when I take it and they take back with a piece, that piece is not defended by a pawn, as it would have been if the pawn was remaining on e3. After c takes d4, they could play e5, but I think knight d5, possibly even bishop takes f3 would be good there. There's not going to be any threats on h7 I'll have to concern myself with, so let's capture. If rook takes c8, queen takes c8, I don't mind that. Maybe my rook can come to d8 quickly. Okay, so e5. Rook takes c1 might just offer an excuse for white's knight to attempt to activate itself via that square after knight takes c1. So knight d5 is looking good. I could throw in bishop takes f3. Bishop takes f3, queen takes f3. Anything doing there? Not really. Knight d5, bishop takes d4. I think I should keep this piece. Yeah, let's retain that. So I'm not worried about bishop takes h7, a Greek gift sacrifice, because after king takes h7, knight g5, I just take it with my dark square bishop. Rook takes c8, probably going to take with the queen. Still not afraid of bishop takes h7. If white could play knight g5 without that knight being captured, well then I'd have to worry about the queen coming to h5 and whatnot. But that's not the case in this position. Okay, so the knight recaptured. Knight f4 is certainly tempting. Attacking the bishop, also hitting g2. If knight f4, I think probably bishop e4, opposing my bishop. And then bishop takes e4, rook takes e4, knight g6 maybe. I think I maybe should start with knight c5, because that's going to attack that light square bishop, and it takes away the e4 square, so they can't put the bishop on that diagonal. Yeah, I like knight c5. Knight c5 is the move that definitely comes to mind. My opponent is playing pretty fast. He's already built up a 3.5-minute time advantage. But their opening play leaves much to be desired. That rook e1 move, that's just sort of a lazy move. I mean, maybe it was due to lack of knowledge of theory. That's fine, we've all been there, but I think even if white just looked at the position logically, I think they would discover that that move wasn't so good. Bishop b1, so white wants to retain the bishop on this attacking diagonal, but at the potential cost of allowing me to play knight f4, attacking g2. Knight f4, bishop takes h7. I'm just going to look at that move again just to make sure. King takes h7. This is a loose piece on this square, so I want to make sure, tactically speaking, white can't take advantage of that, but I don't see a way they can. If knight f4, queen g4, I think I can grab on g2. I think I can get away with that. Not to mention moves like knight d3. So what is white's remedy to knight f4? Is it g3? Because then I get a knight h3 check. King f1. Bishop a6 check, maybe? King g2 then. I mean, even if I have to play knight f4, g3, knight back to g6, I really dislike that position for white. Yeah, this looks menacing. So if g3, knight h3 check, king f1, how do I crush him? Because he would be threatening queen h5 in that case. Okay, well, white's not going to test me with that move. Now I think just rook d8. Line up the rook with the queen. And we're in business. Almost every piece is performing a function then. Yeah, easy decision here, rook d8. White will constantly have to watch out for one of my knights coming to d3, forking the rook and the dark square bishop. Hence, I think that's a decent move. Knight c1. White is playing this like a blitz game. They really are. What to do now? I want to pressure this knight further. Maybe a move like queen c7, just get my queen off the back rank. Trying to come to b6. Because right now my queen isn't doing much on this square. Time's getting a little lower for me, so that might be a decent decision. I wonder if queen c7, if they can sneak in queen c2. Threatening h7. So queen c7, queen c2, knight g6, knight b5, queen b6, bishop d4. Looks pretty bad for white, but you never know. I think I'll still play it. Let's try to send the queen to this square. There's also just queen c2, pawn g6. There's probably nothing wrong with that either. Okay, queen d2, so they don't get the queen off of the d file, but they do attack the knight. Bishop g5 could be played. I think I want that bishop here, though. Bishop g5 just kind of sets up a cheap discovery with knight h3, but I doubt white falls for that. So knight g6 or knight d5, one of the two moves. I think a knight d5 actually is pretty good. Blocks that file, but knight c3 could be a very awkward move from white, or for white. Knight g6, bishop takes g6. Well, that's also much better for me, though. Okay, let's keep it simple. Knight g6. Knight d5 might have been stronger. But in the interests of being practical, I don't want to use too much more time. I feel I'm still quite a bit better, regardless of knight g6 or knight d5. So this is just a purely practical decision. Queen e3. White's looking to keep everything together. Okay, so let's bring this back. Attacking e5 and also freeing up bishop c5. If f4, I feel like that's pretty weakening for them. Knight d3. I'd like to go knight b6 to d5 now, kind of reposition. But first, I want to improve my prospects. Queen b6, maybe? Queen b6, I don't keep an eye on this point anymore, though. White's going to play rook c1, next move. Queen b6 or queen b8? I think queen b8. Looks a little passive, but I'm kind of firing at white's center from a distance. This player's blitz rating isn't incredibly high. It's 1935. And they play a fair amount of blitz, but they've never been higher than 2029. But it certainly seems like they're playing off my time at the moment. When this happens, you just have to focus on making practical decisions. Don't be afraid to play solid moves and try to wait out your opponent. I know there's no increment, so it kind of obliges me to try to play for a win and try to play actively, but I'm not going to panic here just because my opponent's playing fast and hasn't blundered anything yet. I think if I give this enough time, they will blunder. I've seen it time and time again. Okay, so now knight c5 maybe. Knight h4 also looks pretty good. But I think knight c5. Knight c5. Yeah, let's do that. Attacking along the d file. So that f4 move opened this h1 a8 diagonal significantly. Oh, what's nice here is if they move this knight, b3 could hang. I wonder if f5 is a concern. If f5, knight takes d3, though, it's probably in my favor. f5, knight takes d3, take g6. Then I can take on b2 or e1. I can also take f5 right now, because if knight takes, I'm taking on d3. Yeah, that's just better. Yeah, I think their last move was a bluff. But still, okay, I'm going to do this. I think I like this a little bit better than the other line. Taking f5 might have been okay too. I'm just wondering if they could play e6 after that. So we'll do it this way. So now on queen takes d3, which I think they need to play, I'm thinking just e takes f5. Bishop takes d3. I don't know that I saw that that move was possible. I thought they had to take with the queen. Okay, now I wish I would have taken the other way. This still might be okay, but... Alright, we got to do this. Now they can take with the knight at least. Bishop e7. Then e6 could be dangerous. We'll have to watch it. Huh. Yeah, I misplayed this a bit. I don't like that scenario that just transpired. Bishop c5, queen takes c5, rook takes d3, perhaps. Can open some lines towards my king. That might be okay. I think I should consider that pretty closely because I've got 2 minutes left. Yeah, let's go for this. So queen takes c5, rook takes d3, and I'm going to try to get in rook d2 after that. I'm constantly wondering if white plays e6, how this will shake out. Because now e6 would be a natural move. Ooh. I see some weird tactics. e6, pawn takes, knight e7 check, knight takes, queen takes, threatening mate. But I have queen a7 then. Queen a7 would actually win, I believe. So I think I should take this. Weird position. g7 is hanging, but I don't know if they have time to take it. Because rook d2 is coming very quick on the next move. So this is an important line. Knight e7, knight takes e7, queen takes e7. Threatening maiden. Otherwise, I wouldn't have a good way to deal with that because queen f8 would lose the bishop. But I see that I have queen here. Okay, so they're taking with the knight, but I thought rook d2 now is excellent. There's no threat. They're not threatening any check or anything. So rook d2. Rook d2 I take there. Yeah, this has got to be good. If rook takes e6, rook takes g2 check, king f1, queen f4, that's just mate coming up. My queen joins the attack. King e1, queen d2, king f1. Maybe that's not quite mate yet, but there should be queen d1, rook e1, queen f3, something like that. So meanwhile, I'm double attacking the bishop plus the pawn. I just mentioned rook takes e6 because that would threaten rook e8. But I believe he's going to go down if he plays that move. So if g3, probably just take the bishop. Yeah, he resigned. Yeah, well, it got a little messy at the end. I missed bishop takes d3 somehow. Just didn't have a lot of time to process that. Yeah, this bishop was kind of lurking on b1, and maybe that caused me to miss this capture. I wish in retrospect that after this I would have just taken. Although then knight takes, and then it could be the same thing, right? E takes f5, knight takes f5, knight takes d3, bishop takes d3. It's the same thing. But this game was sharp. It got sharp pretty fast at the end, especially, and they didn't even use half their time. So, strange time management by Snapper. I don't know. You're up against a higher rated player and you're not using your time. That's just a recipe for disaster. Okay, so let's go back and have a look at this. So this move order that White adopted is often played by players who don't like facing the Slav, as I was describing. Because if Black wants to get into a Slav, they're taking on c4 at some point, but by playing a quick knight c3 and then e3, you protect that pawn. So I was mentioning the possibility of bishop f5. This is a move that I might try at some point. It's been frowned on in the past because of take and then queen b3, with a double attack on d5 and b7. Black could play bishop c8 and hold everything. It's kind of passive, but it's playable. But lately, there's this line that goes knight c6, queen takes b7, and then bishop back here. That's pretty interesting. Threatening rook b8, queen a6, knight b4, with an attack on the queen and also a forking potential on c2. So I just know that this line is possible. I don't know much more than that. Otherwise, I would have played it. But like I said, I'm going to try to study up on it a bit more and add it to my repertoire. So instead of bishop f5, I played e6 and then knight f3, knight bd7, bishop d3. The other main move is queen c2. There's also g4, the Shirov-Shabalov gambit. But after bishop d3 take, we're in mainline Meran territory. So I played b5, bishop d3. Here, Black can play bishop b7 or a6, or even b4 is playable. I usually play the developing move, bishop b7. So castles, a6. There's a couple lines here for White. I've had opponents play e4 before. This is a demanding move. Basically, White has to get in e4 either on this move or on the next move. If they don't have a shred of an advantage. So after e4, the line goes b4, knight a4, and then c5, attacking this pawn twice. So White responds with e5, and then Black gets in knight d5, and the positions become sharp. Often White will castle and allow Black to take on d4. Black's a bit underdeveloped, but they have a solid knight on d5, and these positions can often be dynamically balanced. So my opponent castled and then a6, so this is another main line, but White, again, has to play e4. e4, c5, and now the move is d5. And this is also dynamic. Black often ends up castling queenside this line, actually. They can play queen c7 or c4, bishop back, and then queen c7. Often with this plan of castling long and having the rook try to oppose the queen down the file. But White plays rook e1, and I think that's a pretty lazy move, as I said. I mean, it sounds harsh to say that. Like, it's not like White's blundering anything with that move, but it just allows Black to fulfill all their goals in this opening. And my primary goal is to achieve c5. Get rid of this bad pawn, threaten to trade for White's central pawn on d4, that figurehead of their pawn structure, and open that light square bishop. And as you can see, the engine already slightly prefers Black, and that's been my experience. When Black gets this advance in unopposed, it's usually slightly favoring the second player. So a4 was played. I guess c4 is playable here. c4 followed by b4 on the next move. Bishop f1, b4. Yeah, the engine thinks this is pretty playable. I wanted to keep the tension on d4, though, so I played b4, just attacking the knight. And maybe white should play knight b1, trying to send the knight to d2, and maybe it has a better chance of either going to b3 or assisting in pushing e4 once it lands on d2. Might not be so bad. Knight a2 I also think is not bad, but they should try to send the knight to b3 ASAP. If they play pawn b3 as they did in the game, I don't think that's going to be so successful. So I played a5. That's fine. Here. And then bishop e7. I think that's also fine. Maybe I could put the bishop on d6. Usually it's better on e7, though, I've found. One reason not to put the bishop on d6 is that if white plays for e4, they might be threatening e5. I don't know if that's relevant in this position, but that's one thing you have to be aware of with this piece arrangement. So bishop e7, bishop b2, castles. Yeah, and rook c1. I just wasn't sure about that. I think rook c1 is normal, but it's very much along the lines of rook e1. I've said in the past that I think people make autopilot rook moves too often. They'll just move a rook to a central square just because. They see so many games where that's the thing the grandmaster's doing, or it's the move the engine likes. But you have to move your pieces purposely, and that goes for your rooks too. It's not enough just to kind of throw the rook towards a central file. Like, you actually have to justify that. And here I think the downside is that white's knight is deprived of this square, and where else is the knight going to go? It needs to go to c1 eventually. So rook c8, e4. I also didn't like that move. I thought that weakened d4, and it seemed like the coming play was going to be nice for black. I have few weaknesses, and white has a slight space advantage as it stands, like with this pawn on e5, but there's all these holes in white's position. And here, as I was describing, we don't have to fear bishop takes h7 because there's no follow-up. There's no knight g5 followed by queen h5, which is standard Greek gift fare. That's an operation that you have to be aware of, but is not at all dangerous here. So white took on c8. I took with the queen. So far, so good. I haven't seen too many improvements from my end. So here I played knight c5. The computer maybe wants to play the more prophylactic rook d8, perhaps staying more flexible and preparing knight c5. I think knight c5 is all right, though. Just attacking the bishop. White played the bishop back to b1, and I played knight f4. Oh yeah, compare that to the line if I had played knight f4 right away. Attacking g2 twice, knight and bishop, and hitting d3. I didn't like it in view of this move, but maybe I was mistaken there. Knight c5. Ah, yeah, that would be good. Knight c5 I didn't see, because then we're attacking this, and should white's bishop take on b7, we take with the queen. And look at that, we've got a new threat on g2. This time queen takes g2 mate. And both these knights are aiming at this d3 square, this vulnerable d3 square, which would fork the white rook and the bishop. That's a square I referenced in the game as being eternally weak for white, and I was looking for ways to exploit that. Well, if that's the case, I kind of wish I would have played knight f4 right away. I didn't connect knight f4 to the possibility of bishop e4 and then knight c5. So I did this, just waited a move, and then went knight f4. White played f3, just blocking. I was wondering if g3, what should happen. Because knight h3 check suggests itself, but after king f1, black has to be heads up because queen h5 is a threat. If I play some lackluster move, queen h5, the engine is showing big advantage black. Oh, I guess I can respond with knight g5. I thought this would be problematic, though, because of the double attack on h7 and also the knight. But I suppose black holds, even with g6, huh? Encouraging them to take. Now I take here? Wow, wild. Let's just say they continue taking. Queen c4 check. Wow, king here, take here, and all of white's pieces are poorly placed. Also, we got a threat like queen f3 followed by queen h1. White's queen is marooned on the side of the board. So even here, black has all these resources available, and I can be down a piece temporarily, but still be completely winning, according to the engine. Yeah, I mean, white has just weakened himself to an extent that it's hard to keep everything together now. I know it looks like white should be okay. I mean, if we flip this board around, it kind of looks like white's position is acceptable. But there's all these squares that they've kind of conquered in a sense, but they've also left them behind to be occupied. White has a position that's too stretched to be able to sufficiently defend. And these knights are very well placed, especially with this one coming into f4. This knight is a permanently bad piece, as I was describing. The pawn on e5 often needs babysitting, whereas looking at black's position, you almost can't find a weakness. I mean, I've got like a weak b5 square, but there's no pawn targets. There's nothing obvious that sticks out, whereas black has all these ways to pressure white. So knight f4. You can't always look at a space advantage and just assume the side with the space advantage is winning or whatnot. That didn't work for the Germans in World War II, and it didn't work for Napoleon either. So, knight c1, queen c7. Yeah, I think queen c7's all right. Feels like I should have a tactic here, but I couldn't find one. Bishop g5. Just looking at the engine. Bishop g5. I like the juxtaposition of my rook on the d file against white's queen on d1. But how to make something of it? I need to pressure the knight on d4. That was what queen c7 was motivated by, a desire to try to put the queen here, and in doing so, just ratchet up the pressure on d4 ever so slightly. Also, I'm hitting e5, which wasn't insignificant coming up. That was kind of useful. I guess white played a couple good defensive moves. Queen d2. And again, they snapped that one off. 7 seconds. Queen d2. Knight g6. Was debating whether to play knight g6 or knight here. I did see bishop g5, which threatens the discovery knight h3 on the queen. But I just didn't think it did much after this. g6. This is also good, though, for black. Okay. So knight g6 and white plays queen e3. Good move. Again, played very quickly. And I went back. Yeah, this is the phase of the game, I'd say over the next, I don't know, 5 moves or so, where I probably misplayed it. And I'll bet this evaluation will indicate that. So rook d5 would have been good. Didn't consider that one. So that triple attacks e5. And if f4, just go back. Rook d8. Wow. That's sophisticated. So the f4 move is so weakening for white, especially in terms of this diagonal. The engine thinks it's worth 2 whole tempi for me to induce that move. Well, if that's the case, I should be pretty pleased with the game continuation, right? Because I played knight d7, they played knight d3. Here I went queen b8, so getting off of the c file. I didn't want rook c1 to come with tempo. And then white voluntarily played f4. And here I played knight c5. Decent move, but perhaps not the best. Knight h4 is better, attacking g2. Ah, yeah, that threatens a fork as well. We're double attacking g2. And I stall f5, because my knight is helping there too. Yeah, that move looks clearly good. Knight h4. I was focusing perhaps too much on the d file and trying to get my rook attacking d4 and setting up tactics there, but yeah, white played resourcefully. f5. So I took on d3, but I expressed some regret about that take. But I don't know that it makes that much of a difference. So the engine wants to trade and then play knight e6, blockading. Okay. So that way pawn e6 will never happen, and their bishop will not be able to operate effectively on that diagonal and attack g7. Check. Yeah, I could see that. I can see why this position is better for black. Great blockading knight on e6. This knight primed to come to f5 or d5. 2 bishops that are fairly ineffective, I would say. And still a lot of weaknesses in the white camp. Nice diagonal for this bishop to roam free on. So I took d3. So if they took g6, I was going to take on either e1 or b2, probably e1. And then after this, I thought just king h8 would be fine. Although maybe I have to take some care, because h7 is weak. Queen h3 is messy, huh? h6, queen takes e6, and despite being down a rook, White has some dangerous stuff at their disposal. They're threatening this, and then mate on h7. Well, you can tell by the analysis or the engine eval that knight takes d3, f takes g6 is bad, but when you have 3.5 minutes and the position is this sharp, that's not at all helpful to know that the engine might think it's bad. You actually have to find the defense yourself. So still this is good. So after takes, king h8 is not good. I should just take here. Somehow that seemed risky to me, but I guess should this position arise, I would have to find that. Yeah, I guess white doesn't have much. Okay. But they took back with the bishop, and I took here. Maybe they missed their chance to play e6 in this position and not worry about taking on f5. I know knight takes f5 is like the most natural move in the world, but I could see why e6 in this circumstance could be more unpleasant, because the knight is still threatening to take f5, and what am I doing about the e-pawn attacking my f-pawn and threatening to draw my king into the center? fe is the best move. Queen takes, king h8. Yikes, this looks like really bad news. Knight and bishop combining on g7. Black can maybe survive somehow. Rook e3 is the best move here. Wow. Oh, that's because if king h1, black has the very nice resource bishop takes g2, forcing white to take, and then we get knight f4 in, and we win the queen and defend g7 at the same time. That wins for black. Wow. But still, e6 could have been good. Critical line, take, queen takes, king h8, knight takes f5, bishop check. And now the counterintuitive rook e3, blocking the check with a rook, and still threatening bishop takes g7 mate. So if I take here, queen takes, and white is doing fantastic, apparently. They're still threatening g7, so this, knight takes, rook takes. Of course, this is all computer assisted. This is a line that would take me a while to figure out. Would be interesting to try to figure out on my own, but in the interest of time, I'm just doing it this way. Oh, and if I take here, I get mated in two. That's the nail in black's coffin. Wow, so suffice it to say that when white gets f5 in, it's not all straightforward for black. I mean, this is a messy position. Even if the computer still thinks I'm slightly better, I think something has gone wrong and I should not have allowed this. So backing up, I think there were a couple opportunities where I could have played better. I'm going to show the rest of the game too, but I just want to try to pinpoint where I could have improved. I think knight f4 right away. I mean, if I had seen that nuance with knight f4, bishop e4, now knight c5, I 100% would have played knight f4 immediately. As played, it still shouldn't be that bad. I mean, I was still pretty pleased. Maybe a move like g6 is helpful somewhere. I saw the computer was recommending that a second ago. Like a prophylactic move just to blunt any opportunities white has on this diagonal. It's probably a wise investment of a single tempo. So queen c7 instead. It looks to me like white just found a couple good moves here. Like these are all the best moves according to the engine. Queen d2, back. Queen e3, defending e5. Knight d3, defending e5. Here they played f4. Maybe that was dubious. I could have played knight h4. But yeah, it looked like white just kind of rattled off a couple good moves, and maybe I shouldn't feel too bad about that. Still having an advantage. Yeah, knight h4, threatening knight takes g2. These games always tend to get a little messy if the time gets low. So back to the game. So when I took on f5 and white recaptured, I played bishop c5. So the fancy way of trading my dark square bishop for the bishop on d3. Now, time management wise, at this point, I think white has survived the initial unpleasantness that they were being subjected to not long ago. And if I was white, I would just take a good look around. I would recognize that I had 3 times as much time as my opponent, and I potentially have an initiative. And I would try to use that time to find something pretty killer. I've got 2.5 minutes left. If white poses me enough problems here, I could totally lose on time. Or just blunder because I have to make a move. But white has 9:15, and they spent 10 seconds and played e6. Like, yes, e6 is the top engine move, but given that their follow-up was not great after this, I really question the wisdom in playing this quickly. So e6, I took it. It's interesting how back here, yeah, for a moment the engine was giving an advantage to white after e6, but once the move is played and then fe is played, it's completely equal, apparently. The reason why e6 is natural is because it does open this bishop. I mean, that's a piece that white wants to have participating in the attack, so it's no big wonder why they would want to play e6. And also this pawn is weak, so advancing it and trying to offload it makes perfect sense. Yeah, this position's a mess, though. Like, look at the top move, queen b6. That's not an obvious move. So what's the idea of queen b6? So if I take, I assume queen e6 check is bad. Because then if the king runs to the corner, queen e8.
Check.
Fork on the king and the queen. I can't take. I'm just going to get mated.
Check. Checkmate.
So black would be forced to part with their queen. Yeah, I mean, if white were to find a move like queen b6, and I had 2 minutes on my clock to defend this position, I would be sweating bullets, because this is not a situation I want to be in as black. Knight f8, a very hard to find backward knight move to defend e6 is the best move, and it's even messy here. I mean, g7 is hanging, knight e7 is possible. I'm relying on counterplay involving rook d2 still, attacking g2 and also the bishop. But yeah, if you're white, you got to find something better than what you did in the game. They took on g7, and yeah, looks like after rook d2, it's game over. Knight takes g7 is too slow, because after knight takes g7, even if white gets another move, there's no move that's going to kill me. They don't even have a check. I guess they have queen f8, but of course that's ridiculous. So they don't have a check follow-up, so that means I've got a free hand to create a threat of my own. I'm not going to sit back and try to defend my king. I'm going after white. And rook d2 perfectly highlights that double attack. And white is busted. There's another cool line I was mentioning here. What was it? It was knight e7.
Check.
Knight e7, take, and queen takes. At first, this looks dangerous. They're threatening this with this. So now I don't have time for rook d2. But fortunately, I saw that
check.
I had this resource, queen a7 check. And white would have to move the king, because if they block with either the bishop or the rook, I'm just taking with my queen, and that's winning. So, like, if king h1, then we have bishop takes
check.
g2, force the king to capture, and look at that, we've opened the avenue. You can take their queen. So that was one hurried calculation I was able to make before determining that f takes e6 was fine. Otherwise, knight e7 might be virtually winning, because after
check.
this, what other choice does black have other than queen a7 check? It's just too hard to defend this pawn. If e5, just bishop takes e5. I guess I would still have that same tactic, but if queen f8 trying to defend g7, then queen takes here. White's just up a piece. Lots of tactical nuances. But yeah, they took g7, and how long did they spend? 25 seconds. Too little. They've got plenty of time, and that move just throws the game away after they had fought back and honestly done a pretty good job of defense prior to that. So rook d2, and white just resigned. They're going to be down at least a piece. And if they play rook takes e6, as I was saying in the game, this threatens rook e8, but
check.
I was pretty sure that this was just going to be a win.
Check.
Yeah, king e1. I was thinking queen
check.
d2 here. And I think I saw a mate with
check,
rook e1, and then queen
check.
f3.
Checkmate.
Might be something else too, but that's one line. Okay, so a game that was decided largely on time management, I think. And if you play this line for white, just gotta make more of an effort to challenge black in the center. Black is organizing all this queenside play with bishop e7, a6, and then c5. So white has to do something faster than what they did in the game. Rook e1 is too slow. So hope you guys enjoyed this game. I'll be back tomorrow with another video. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye.